There are two kinds of people giving advice about AI and your career right now. The first kind says you have nothing to worry about. AI is just a tool. Learn to use it, stay curious, and you'll be fine. These people tend to work in tech, or they're trying to sell you something. The second kind says everything is burning. Half of all jobs, gone. Your skills, obsolete. Your degree, a waste. These people tend to get a lot of clicks. Neither of them is giving you what you actually need. Because here's the thing. The loudest voices on this topic are either too optimistic or too scared. And both of those positions have the same effect. They make you passive. One tells you to relax. The other tells you it's already over. Neither one gives you a system for thinking clearly about your own situation. The truth is more useful than both. So the question this video is going to answer is, if most of the advice is wrong, what does getting this right actually look like? This video is for you specifically if you're somewhere in the first decade of your career. Maybe you're 22 and just starting out. Maybe you're 31 and 2 or 3 years into a role that felt stable a few years ago and feels slightly less stable now. You're not panicking, but you're paying attention. And something doesn't quite add up. You've read the articles, you've watched some videos, you've heard learn to use AI tools so many times, it started to sound like eat your vegetables. Technically true, probably not enough. What nobody has given you is a clear way to think about your own position. Not careers in general, not the future of work. Your position, your skills, your leverage. That gap is what this video is about. In 2023, a survey of knowledge workers across several industries found that roughly 60% of them said they were using AI tools at work in some capacity. A follow-up question asked how confident they felt that they were using those tools in a way that was actually improving their output, not just their speed. Only about a quarter said yes. That gap is interesting. Most people are using the tools. Far fewer feel like they understand what they're doing with them or why. Now you could read that as a skills gap, and that's how most commentators read it. People need more training, more tutorials, more tool literacy. But I think that's the wrong diagnosis. The gap isn't really about knowing how to use the tools. It's about not having a framework for thinking about what the tools actually change and what they don't. When you don't have that framework, you end up doing one of two things. You either over-delegate, you hand things off to AI that you shouldn't, and your own thinking quietly atrophies. Or you under-adopt, you avoid the tools out of vague anxiety and fall behind people who are using them thoughtfully. Both of those paths have real costs, and neither one comes from not trying hard enough. They come from not having a clear mental model. That's what we're going to build right now. The reason most AI career advice is wrong comes down to a single mistake. It asks the wrong question. Most advice asks, which jobs will AI replace? That's actually the least useful question you can ask if you're trying to navigate your own career right now. It's too big, too abstract, and it assumes the answer is fixed, that there's some list somewhere, and your job is either on it or it isn't. The more useful question is, which parts of my work are being restructured, and what does that restructuring put a premium on? Those are very different questions, and the system that answers the second one has 4 steps. Step 1. AI automates outputs, not judgment. This is the foundational distinction that most commentary misses. What AI is genuinely good at is producing outputs, text, summaries, code, images, analysis, quickly and at scale. What it is not good at, in any reliable sense, is the judgment layer that determines which output was the right one, why it matters, and what to do with it. Think of it this way. A junior analyst used to spend 3 hours pulling data, formatting a report, and writing a summary. AI can now do most of that in minutes, but someone still has to decide what question that report is supposed to answer, whether the findings are actually significant, and how to communicate them to a decision maker who doesn't have time to read the whole thing. The output got faster. The judgment requirement didn't go away. In fact, it got more visible because now the bottleneck isn't the work, it's the thinking behind it. Step 2. When outputs get faster, judgment becomes more exposed. This is where the system gets interesting. For most of the last several decades, the judgment layer was somewhat hidden behind the production layer. Your ability to think clearly about a problem was bundled together with your ability to execute the work. It was hard to separate the two. AI is unbundling them, and that's uncomfortable for a lot of people, because it turns out that some of what felt like skilled work was actually just effortful work. When the effort gets automated away, what's left? For some people, the answer is a lot. Clear thinking, strong communication, the ability to read a room, to ask the right question, to know when a result is plausible versus when it looks right but isn't. Those things remain. For others, the honest answer is that a significant portion of their value was tied up in doing things that can now be done faster and cheaper by a machine. And yeah, that's a difficult thing to reckon with. But it's better to reckon with it now than to find out later. Step 3. The people who adapt well aren't learning more tools, they're developing better taste. Now that you understand the judgment versus output distinction, here's why that matters for how you actually spend your time. The dominant advice says, learn more tools, use Copilot, use Claude, use whatever is released next month, stay current. That's not wrong, but it's incomplete, and here's why. Tools change constantly. The specific products available today will look very different in 2 years. If your primary investment is in tool familiarity, you're running on a treadmill. You'll always be catching up. What doesn't change, or changes much more slowly, is the quality of your underlying judgment. Your ability to evaluate an output and know if it's good. Your ability to frame a problem clearly before you even start. Your ability to communicate a conclusion in a way that lands. In creative fields, this quality of evaluation is sometimes called taste. I think that word applies more broadly. Taste is knowing the difference between a result that technically answers the question and a result that actually solves the problem. It's a judgment call. It compounds over time. And it's exactly what you lose if you outsource your thinking too aggressively. The people adapting well to AI aren't just learning to use the tools faster. They're using the tools as a way to get more reps on the judgment layer. They're evaluating more outputs, making more decisions, developing a sharper sense of what good looks like. Step 4. The advice ecosystem is optimized for anxiety, not accuracy. Here's where most people get stuck. Even if you understand the first 3 steps, you're still swimming in a content environment that is actively working against clear thinking. Pessimistic content gets clicks because it triggers threat responses. Optimistic content gets shares because it feels good. Neither of those forces selects for accuracy. The result is that the most emotionally resonant takes. AI will take all the jobs, or just learn to prompt and you'll be fine. Crowd out the more nuanced, more useful analysis. And because this content is so loud and so constant, a lot of smart people end up making decisions based on a distorted picture. They either overinvest in tool tutorials and end up with a surface-level fluency that doesn't translate into real leverage, or they catastrophize and make defensive career moves based on a timeline that may not match reality. Step back for a moment and look at the bigger picture. The advice is wrong, not because the people giving it are stupid. It's wrong because the system that produces and distributes advice is optimized for engagement, not usefulness. That's a structural problem. And recognizing it is the first step to not being controlled by it. Here's what the difference looks like in practice. You're in a meeting, someone presents an AI-generated analysis, the numbers are clean, the slide looks good, If you don't have this framework, here's what happens. You either accept it because it looks authoritative, or you dismiss it out of vague distrust. Either way, you're reacting to the output, not engaging with it. You're a passive receiver. If you do have this framework, something different happens. You immediately start asking the judgment layer questions. What question was this analysis actually built to answer? Is that the right question? What are the assumptions underneath these numbers, and are they defensible? What's missing? You're not slower. You might actually be faster, because you're spending your mental energy in the right place. The person without the framework is waiting to find out whether AI is going to affect their career. The person with the framework is already using the shift to build skills that are harder to replicate and more durable than the ones being automated. One of those positions is stable. The other depends on a lot of things outside your control. Think of your work as having two layers: the production layer, the execution, the drafting, the formatting, the searching, the summarizing, and the judgment layer, the framing, the evaluation, the decision, the communication of the conclusion. AI is taking on more and more of the production layer. That is going to continue. Your job is to get very clear on where your judgment layer actually lives in your work right now. What decisions are you making? What evaluations are you doing? Where are you the one determining whether something is right or good or worth pursuing? And then ask yourself a harder question. Are you actively developing that layer? Or are you just spending time in it by default? Because there's a difference between someone who is good at judgment because they've been doing it for years, and someone who is good at judgment because they've been deliberately, consciously practicing it by evaluating more outputs, by thinking out loud, by asking what the right question is before they answer any question. The reframe is this: the useful response to AI is not to learn more tools. It's to become clearer about where your thinking actually lives, and to protect and develop that layer with the same seriousness that you used to give to output quality. Output quality is getting commoditized. Judgment quality is getting more valuable. Act accordingly. So, the question this video started with: if most AI career advice is wrong, what does getting it right actually look like? Here's the answer compressed into one sentence. Getting it right means asking not will AI take my job, but which parts of my work require judgment, and how do I become better at them? That question is harder to answer. It requires more honesty. It doesn't make for a clean headline or a shareable tweet, but it's the question that will actually tell you something useful about your position. Now, there's a follow-on question I haven't answered, and it's the natural next step. If the judgment layer is what matters, what are the specific skills that make up strong judgment in a world where AI is doing more of the execution? Not in the abstract. Concretely, the things you can actually practice and develop. That's a different video, and it's one worth making carefully.